trends around the world. Process automation is one of them. So it's definitely happening around the whole world. And I think the thing to keep in mind, regardless of what organisation you're in, whether it's financial services or non-financial services, being aware of the environment you're doing the RPA implementation is. So I like to sort of say with the clients I work with, I say, think about the 4 things. If I look at the fines and penalties, CBA was in the headline this week, $700 million fine with AUSTRAC. There's a number of fines and penalties. That's just one of recently in Australia and globally. Think about the regulations. AUSTRAC, ASIC, APRA, look at the government side, OHS. There's a myriad of regulation and they're just coming front and centre of things. I don't think there's any organisation, regardless of the industry that you're in, that's not impacted by regulation. Fair point? Mm-hmm. Yeah? Then think about the industry scrutiny. We're going through a Royal Commission in the financial services sector at the moment. Think about the life insurance and advice financial planning industry. If we go back the last decade, I think I counted there's 4 or 5 major industry scrutiny going on. And then ROI, like what company isn't under cost pressure? Like I have never been in an environment where people are going, I've got a couple of spare millions of dollars, do what you want, right? So I think the key message I want you to just contextualize your journey back with is, we are implementing RPA, this is the environment we're doing it in, and if people say we're going to reduce risk as the starting point, take a step back and ask yourself, is that really true? My personal belief is that it's not. Happy for you to have that debate with me. So, and the reason I say that is, I actually look at RPA and I say, we're dealing with different risks. And so rather than taking my word, I have gone back in history. So if we go back to the early days, and I'm a big Bollywood fan, so if I go back to the old Bollywood movies and they talk about the history when the wars and things were going on, how did we deliver messages? We used to have a person who would run with the message before a war to have peace negotiations. And so what was the risk we were managing then? You had to be fit. We probably needed to make sure someone didn't die or get sick as they were delivering the message. That was the kind of risk we were managing. Then we sort of went to communicating with writing letters. What was the risk we were managing then? Someone might intercept our letter might get lost and someone would actually get our confidential message. Different risk. We're just communicating in a different way. Then the telephone came in, and what was the risk there? We're still communicating, but someone could be listening into our conversation. We could be tapped. Different type of risk. Then we got the mobile phone and there was video. Again, we're communicating in a different way. What's the risk? Someone could be tapped in and actually watching the private video conference or video that's happening. Someone could be tapping in right now. Again, different type of communication, different risk. So, my main point is, if you look at everything through history, we've been communicating in different ways, different risks have come across, and we manage them. And so, if we're in the phase now that we're going down robotics, RPA, it's just a different risk. It's not necessarily reducing or increasing, it may, but the whole question is, have you had that conversation in your organisation around the risks that you're introducing in, and are we managing them? So, what will I cover today? I will give you some questions that you can take back to your organisation regardless of where you are in your RPA journey. And then I'll give you some insight to some regulation around RPA that you should consider. Unless you want one of those fines for breaching anything, but I don't think anyone wants that. So, and the way I'm going to do this is because we've got a number of different people. Some people are working with RPA where you're at the first stage, you're selecting a business process, like Luke was just explaining. If you're selecting a business process, you might be in the proof of concept stage, you might be piloting, you might actually be in implementation, Or you could have done a whole RPA and you're going, what lessons can I learn? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through each of these 5 stages and give you 1 or 2 questions from a risk angle that you can take back to your organisation tomorrow and you should be asking on the project. Yeah? So, first one, if you're at the first stage and you're about to select a business process, so Luke was talking about, think about, is it rule-based? How's the volume? What's the complexity? What I say, and when I work with clients and businesses, I say, have you actually looked at the process and gone, how many handoffs are there? How many times are you going back and forth? How many audit issues have you got around there? Have you got 600 audit issues that are flagged red? Perhaps you should maybe just redesign the process before you just go and automate a process that's perhaps not so good already. I also say to people, have a look at the incidents. The number of incidents that have occurred in a process can give you insight into what are the real issues in that process. Is it a customer issue? Is it a regulatory issue? Are we actually just doing something that's making no sense and we're actually wasting money? So these are the factors that I generally say to people when you're selecting a process. Take the things that Luke said. From a risk perspective, ask these questions. When I was in the industry, and there was only 2 banks that Craig mentioned that I worked at beforehand, my team and we went through 5 years worth of incident data and analysed it. Now we didn't use fancy data analytics tools, but Excel was pretty powerful, and you can find some relevant themes, and it actually helped us give our business some advice as to whether they should digitize or offshore their processes. So that one single piece of data gave us enough info. So that's my main thing. If you're about to start, ask some really good questions. Now, if you're at the proof of concept stage, I will say, think about risk clusters. And this is something that I'm actually really proud that I discovered that KPMG's developed, that I didn't know before I started. What we're seeing in industry at the moment is, over here, at the moment, when you identify risks, you look at the likelihood of it occurring and the impact. What a team of data scientists, and I'm going to say this on record, some nerdy people and really smart people did was they went through and analysed all these different risks across the industry, and they discovered that over time, the speed of risk, the interconnectedness of risk can actually create new risks. So we're sitting there looking at what's my risk, when will it occur, when in fact we could be doing something and the speed of the risk might be faster than there was before, or 2 small risks could actually, if they happen at the same time, create a larger and bigger risk. So there's a fancy tool and there's a lot of data and science behind it. But for me, the key thing is, if you're in proof of concept, think about what new risks you're introducing into the process. Bless you. Ask the question, what new risks are we introducing from our existing risks? If they're interconnected or the speed is changing, what risks have we actually just introduced to our business? And there is a free tool. This is the only KPMG thing I will say. Go on the KPMG website, the free tool is there, you can play around and see the demo. But that's really the main question I want you to take back if you're in proof of concept. The other thing I will ask you to take away is, again, do the simple exercise. Think about all the different types of risk classes your organisation has, and do a pre-RPA and post-RPA. Again, simple table, and have the conversation with the business, with your RPA project team, and go, before we even implement RPA, what's our risk profile? And I'll give you an example. I often find that operational risk is amber, right? There's a lot of human interaction, we've got processes, errors happen. So generally, operational risk is classified amber on most people's profile. And then the business case will say, once we do RPA, oh, everything will be green. And so my question and challenge to you is, go back and do a pre-RPA and a post-RPA. Once you ask the question, what are the new risks we've introduced? What does it do to our cybersecurity, our compliance, all these new risks that are coming in? You will find two things. Either it's staying the same, or op risk might go green, but reputational risk might go amber. So you could either have kept the risk profile the same, you may have gone down. I probably see more companies change their risk profile where reputational and a number of other categories become amber. Okay, so key point, do that simple exercise. It doesn't take more than 5 minutes. And again, I haven't used some fancy tool. It's a table you could do in a piece of paper. So, proof of concept, two things. Identify the risks and the changes, and do a pre and post RPA assessment. Now, if you have gone through proof of concept, you've got your millions of dollars, you get the money to go and do a pilot. And then off you go, you might do one of the processes that Luke showed. So you're doing a pilot. What questions should we ask and what should we consider? My favourite one, there's a number of things. So I will say at each stage there's lots of different things. I could be here for a whole day. So I've kind of picked my top one or two and not taking you through all the 10 things I take clients through. If you are interested in all of them, my contact details will be there. Reach out, we can have a coffee and I can take you through all of them. My favourite one for the pilot is create the data that you need. Ask that question. So the reason I say that, last year I had the opportunity to go to New York, and I was sitting at this conference and I heard this marketing guru who was presenting at the conference, and I don't remember his name, but credit to him. He was sharing with the fact that his marketing company is helping organisations actually advertise in Times Square. So we all know how much it costs to advertise in Times Square. I can't afford it. And he was explaining how he is making sure that his clients that are advertising on Times Square are getting the return for their investment. And what he was explaining was, Beauty and the Beast, Disney, why would they advertise, and I think I took the photo at around 7 p.m, why would they advertise at 7 p.m. Times Square spending millions of dollars? And he goes, his company had worked using data from social media. So they were picking up LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, all sorts of data points, and they had created a new data type. And the data type was called footsteps. So they were literally counting footsteps in Times Square, and they were getting insights that said, at 7 o'clock is the time when most kids under 8 are with their parents walking through Times Square. That's the perfect time for Disney to advertise. I thought it was powerful. I love it. So what I've found when I've been working with people is, in your pilot, actually ask yourself, when we have RPA'd our process, what do we want to know? What is it do you want to know? These guys wanted to know the number of footsteps. What do you want to know? Create the data. Create the data type while you're in pilot. It will help you to manage your risk and even monitor your performance when you've implemented it. You're not running around doing what I know I have, manual runarounds. You're running around creating reporting and putting data together to say, yep, this is how we're performing. Build the data set that you want while you're in pilot. My other favourite one around pilot is, so how many people here in the room has got a risk person on their RPA project with them right now? 3 people, okay. And those 3 people, how many risk people do you have to deal with? Do you have one risk person, or do you have a compliance person, a cybersecurity person? How many?
Multiple?
Yeah, multiple?
Yeah, 3.
3? Yeah. And if you think about, and if I think about my time working on these projects, this is one of my colleagues in Germany, in KPMG. He's put this diagram together, and I love it because we call it the risk islands. There is a risk and control person, there's an IT security person, there's a compliance person, there's a BCM. I think all up you can probably count about 15 to 20 different risk people that you need to talk to. We don't have that kind of time. So one of the things we're advocating for is integrate risk management. Have one risk lead who funnels everything and talks to all the experts. You don't need 15 people at the table. So if there's one thing I want you to take away is, on your RPA project, have one risk lead and ask them to go and talk to all the other different types of risk people. And the favourite example I have of this is, if you think about Richard Branson, he's got his own island. I haven't been there, but I've read enough stories and seen photos. You don't go there and have like food on one part of the island and then another activity somewhere else. It's all integrated. You have a great experience. I saw the photos of Obama's. They look pretty happy. So how can we be as happy doing an RPA project? Let's integrate risk management. So get one risk advisor on your project. Get them to work with all the experts, because you are going to need to cover compliance, privacy, BCM, outsourcing. There is enough different special areas. You don't need to wear the burden of dealing with 15 to 20 people. So there are two key things for you in pilot. Now, if you are in project implementation like Luke, who's implemented, 15 or 18 processes, and you're right in the middle of it, what's my biggest tip here? Design and build your controls right now. I cannot say the number of projects I've been on where we cut the scope or we cut the project and we are left with manual controls or manual workarounds. The impact that it does to your risk profile is it increases it to probably red. The amount of cost that it's going to cost your business to manage those controls is just going to increase year on year, because you're going to manage the control, you've got to have people doing the control, and you've got to do testing. So, how do I actually, why does that really strike for me? So, I was in India last year, so this is the trains in Mumbai. That's what I've been told that it's actually more from a Harry Potter, but anyhow, it represents the trains in Mumbai. So when I was in Mumbai last year, Captain Raghuram, he shared a story of the number of deaths that happen in India on the train tracks is just phenomenal. It's just such a high number. And people were going in to go, well, why are people like, are they suicidal, or is it accidental? What is it? And so it was a huge risk and a real cause for concern in the community. They asked the train drivers and they said, oh, people are just suicidal, they're jumping in front of the trains. You talk to the community and they go, no, people were just, they didn't see the train, and so what they did was they started putting posters up, they put barricades, they had a bell that would ring to say the train's coming, don't cross the tracks. Do you think the deaths actually reduced? Yes, no? No, they didn't. And so the investigation team went in and went, what's happening? And so they started analysing the scene, and they found people were carrying their groceries in their bag at the time of death. They're sort of going, why would someone who's committing suicide have their bag of shopping? And so they just couldn't figure it out until they sort of they had scientists involved, and they discovered that the human eye can't actually judge the distance of how far the train was away. So people were crossing thinking the train was further away when in fact it was closer. And so to mitigate that risk, what they did was, across the train tracks, they painted yellow stripes. And it helped the humans to judge how far the train was or how close it was. Now that reduced deaths in Mumbai on the train tracks. Now, why am I telling you a train story about death and probably not the most happiest thing? Reason being, on RPA projects and any digital projects I've been involved, the common mistake I see is people don't design and build their controls as they're implementing the project. But most importantly, the control that they put in place is usually like a bell or a poster or put some barricades. The message that I want you to take away is find the real root cause, find the human element. If you understand how humans behave, you can design and build the right controls which are generally better if they're automated while you're implementing your project. Don't go for the standard, a policy and procedure document, or we will just roll out some training and awareness. Think about the human element, what's the human behavior, and how can we actually either automate it or build in the control in our bots or some other way that's actually going to mitigate the risk. And then finally, if you've implemented RPA and you're the expert and you're happy, what are the two things I generally say to people is think about how you're going to monitor them. And I love Luke's example of you've got bots who are monitoring. I saw a really good example, and again, I'm not advocating for any of these, but I really love the example. Microsoft Asia, for fraud management, have launched a whole 24/7 monitoring unit, and they can actually see where frauds are going to happen or where they have happened. So they're monitoring live. And I think with RPA, the key thing is how many people have actually got bots that are 24/7 monitoring and looking at what's happening. So have a think about how you're going to monitor it, and then again, how are you going to govern the bots? How are you actually going to manage, say you sort of implement lots of RPAs and you end up with 1,000 bots, how are you governing them? How do you know how things are working and who's overseeing them? I think they're the two biggest things I find people forget at the end of a project. So they were sort of the tips across the 5 stages. I will say a lot of these references are for financial services, but I think it's quite relevant for any industry. What are the regulation around RPA? I think have a think about, and again, none of these are complicated. They're all 6 to 8 pages read, quite simple, plain English. CPS 231 for APRA, which is a regulator in the financial services industry. 231, very simple, talks about if you are either offshoring or outsourcing any part of your process. And most people, when they're doing RPA, they select a provider. So when you're selecting a provider, you've got to think about 231. So become familiar with that. Again, national privacy principles. We are dealing with people's data. There are compliance issues. So there is a number of privacy principles in Australia. Again, not complicated, quite simple. Be familiar with them. And my favourite, risk management, because I'm a risk professional at heart. CPS 220 is a really nice read which just takes you through from A to Z what your risk management requirements are. Again, you are implementing RPA, there are risk elements to consider. Have a read of CPS 220, you will get some ideas on risk management to consider. And again, we talked about governance at the end. 510, again, shows you some really good basic things from a hygiene perspective around good governance management. And then finally, or secondly, 235, if you're dealing with data, there's actually a prudential practice guide that talks about what type of data you've got, how the data is moving, and what your requirements are around data management. And then my favourite, because I just did a certification in cyber risk, is APRA is coming out with a prudential standard around cyber risk management next year. It talks about cyber risk and what organisations must have in place. So I would say if you're manufacturing, energy, insurance, wealth, bank, government sector, regardless of what industry you're in, these couple of regulation can give you some really good insights to help manage and not end up with fines for your organisation. And as promised, if you want to have a chat about more risk in your RPA project, they're my contact details. But thank you.